All right, now we're here. Hi, everybody. Hi, high school students and high school parents of high schoolers. I want to introduce you to Dr. Jason Esters. He is the one who it leads the discussions for the high school students who are going through O Freedom High School Part 1 and O Freedom High School Part 2. And I went to his class just to be a fly on the wall last semester. And I was blown away. I honestly was on the verge of tears because I was like, wow, first of all, I can't believe we get to offer this class because Dr. Esters is amazing. And he really gets the kids involved in the discussions and has discussions that we should all be having. So one of these days, I'm going to persuade him to do an adult class. But until then, he is offering 2 high school level classes for us, for those students doing O Freedom High School. And I'll tell you more about which class is for who. But I want to introduce you to him and just get a taste of what this class is. And I'm telling you, you probably got an email from me today that said, your high school student needs this class. And I'm not lying. Y'all, get your student in this class. Okay, but we'll talk about that later. Let's talk to Dr. Esters, and his students call him Professor Jason, right? So we're gonna try to go with that tonight. But tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll start talking more details about the actual class.
Oh, thank you so much, Selena. I really appreciate having the opportunity to be here and talk to the people out here about the wonderful things that we're doing in with the high school discussion. So first of all, my name is Jason Esters. This is, and I was counting this up earlier today, this is my 23rd year as an educator, and I've been teaching.
Wow, I was barely born.
You know, right? Yeah, just barely. It's so young. So what I've been teaching for the past 10 years, I've been a college professor at a community college in Philadelphia. And primarily what I teach is English. I teach writing and reading. But over the span of my academic career, I've had an opportunity to teach history and English. I started off actually as a 6th grade English teacher.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I'm actually certified right now, 7 through 12. And I moonlight as a substitute teacher in Philadelphia. Now that's a whole nother story in and of itself, but there's part of me that really enjoys being in actual classrooms and gives me an opportunity to share what I have with more and more students. So I'm a teacher through and through, right? In addition, I'm also a homeschool dad. My wife and I, we've been homeschooling our children for over 10 years. So homeschool is what they know. So as I said earlier, we have 4 brown, beautiful, rambunctious, and brilliant children that give our lives lots of joy, and we tear our hair out, but it's a wonderful, wonderful journey. So it's an awesome opportunity to be able to share some of the things that we talk about in our homeschool with your homeschoolers. And there's a very unique dynamic that happens in a household where older children are being homeschooled. Because in addition to them being a little bit more self-directed and having a clearer sense of areas that they really want to focus on, what I found working with other homeschoolers and teaching my own kids is they yearn for a certain kind of interaction. They yearn for a certain kind of engagement when it comes to material, when it comes to what they're reading. And that's one of the things that I'm really excited to help share and help provide with your homeschoolers. You know, once they reach high school age, that's really the place where they're trying to test out how they're going to think and how they're going to respond as the young men and young women that they're becoming. And part of that is tied to their intellectual pursuits, right? It's tied to the ways that they process information, and they need a space where they can work all of that out. And that's what the homeschool discussion, what the high school discussions with Old Freedom are really designed to do. Take some of the things that they're reading, take some of the material that they've begun to digest, help them understand it better, but also give them a place where they can see how those ideas mesh up with their own forming ideas and how they seem in response to other people doing the same thing. So I can't wait to begin having those kinds of discussions. It's the kind of discussions that, as an educator, I'm always excited to try to build.
And it's kind of cool because in the curriculum, there are those places where it says, you know, go talk to somebody about XYZ,
Yeah.
or find a connection in current events. Also, there's some other connection type questions. And it's cool for them to be able to have these discussions with other people their age,
Right.
who are studying the same things. Because even though they know other people the same age in their real life, they're not usually studying the same things with the same angle.
Absolutely. And part of it is, even if they're not reading the exact same thing, having exposure to the same places engenders a certain kind of rich conversation that you just can't have in other places. Look, no matter how much interest you might have in having a conversation about a particular text or a particular moment in history, if you haven't read it, if you haven't been exposed to it, there's only so far that conversation can go. So having the richness of a place where you can take that conversation to another level just by virtue of the fact that more people have been exposed to it is a tangible thing that you can feel in a room. It enlivens conversation in an entirely different way. And you know, young people need it. Our high school students need it because not only does it help them in their own personal development, it's also one of those skills, abilities, experiences that also propels them to their, you know, after high school experience, whether that be college or in the workforce or studying abroad or working abroad, you know, whatever the case may be, it's really an enriching encounter for them to have.
Yeah. And what I witnessed from being in your class was the students are comfortable enough to ask the questions. You know, sometimes like the class I was in was about slavery, and it was about and sometimes when you have these discussions with people, they're scared to ask the questions, and the students in this class were not scared to say, you know, well, what about this? And, you know, not feel like, well, you shouldn't be thinking that way or whatever. Do you see what I'm saying? Like the whole process of them coming to their own conclusions.
Yeah, one of the things that we always try to create initially from the jump, and we always get to this place, and we always create a safe space for people to think and feel and say. And that's really important because we're all working through ideas. That's number one. The other thing is, and this is important, that I really love about the Old Freedom curriculum, but it's also important for us to actually voice, is that when you center people's humanity, some of these discussions become, they're still full, but they become easier to have because you're human beings talking about other human beings. And though that sounds very simple and sophomoric, unfortunately, it's something within the context of America that doesn't always get centralized, that we are human beings with feelings, with thoughts, with perspectives and experiences. And we are going to relate to history, not just as facts and figures, not just as dates, times, places, and people, but as other human beings who have these experiences that may not be like our own, that have motivations that we may agree with and may not agree with, that have had to have some of the same bodily and mental struggles that we have, but in different conditions. And being able to recognize that produces a more fertile ground for discussion, but it's also a lot more generous because it allows people to be who they are.
Yeah.
And for high school students, again, like I said, I started off, you know, in junior high school and teaching high school students for a while. A lot of times they're trying to figure out who they are. and have a place to express who they are. And some of the struggles and challenges that they have with their erstwhile parents is them trying to figure out who they are and what feels right for them. The same dynamic happens in discussions. You know, we try on different ideas to see, you know, what fits, what works, what's healthy, what's not. Yeah, and there needs to be space to do that.
And that's a lifelong skill. That's not just the high school students, you know, having to navigate, having to learn to see the world through a lens of humanity, like see events happening, see, you know, read whatever they're reading in history. That's like a skill that needs to be developed, but that's not what we're talking about. Okay, so tell us about, let's go back. First of all, you are teaching, I don't want to call it teaching. You're facilitating, yes, 2 different classes. Tell us about the first one, the part 1.
All right, so the first class that I'm teaching is part 1 of the O Freedom High School curriculum. And so it's discussions around part 1. Of course, you know, part 1 starts off with pre-America and kind of goes up for a while, and we get a chance to talk about not just how America is formed, but also how it's shaped as a nation and some of the ideologies that helped to shape it. We look at the Civil War, we look at, well, before the Civil War, we look at the Revolutionary War, we look at the formation of the country, we look at conflicts that lead to the Civil War, and then we even move into the 20th century. So for this semester, what I'm really looking forward to is actually talking about America kind of after the Civil War and right into the Reconstruction period. We get a chance to talk a little bit about how the different eras that happened in American history. You know, the book does a really good job, not the book, but the curriculum does a really good job of separating different texts and creating questions that build up different eras of American history. And so we just look at how, we're just looking at how to explore those different eras in a way that allows students to enter into the discussion in different ways. So we'll talk about the notion of genocide in America, how that happens with Native Americans, but also with Africans and also those of Asian descent. We'll talk about abolition and how abolition plays an important role in moving out of slavery and into Reconstruction. We'll talk about women's movements. We'll talk about notions of uncivil war and how those things help to lead into the America that we're in today. So all of those particular discussions, right, revolve around the particular texts that are assigned in the O Freedom curriculum. Now we know that in that curriculum, there's gonna be some nonfiction and some fiction. And when you're going through it, and I know this with my own kids, they're in all kinds of different places in the text. But that's one of the reasons why we focus on a particular span of time, what I'm calling an era. So even if one student might be, you know, really deep into Stamped, you know, by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds, and there's somebody else that's really heavy into, you know, some earmarked chapters in the Howard Zinn text, we can still find a place to meet because I've had the advantage of reading it all, and we can start looking for connections between different events. Because one of the things is the events don't change. It's the perspectives on the events that do, right? And we can.
You said in a different video that your superpower is segues.
Yeah, that's what I do. I look for connections. And part of the reasons that, one of the reasons why it's important for me to do that as a facilitator is to help everyone feel a part of the conversation. But also what's also important about that is we need to become adept at finding the segues in our own lives with the information that we're given and the information that we receive every day. I keep saying this over and over again. We are living in a historical moment. You know, somebody 20, 30, 40 years from now is going to be reading about the time that we live in right now. And because it's such an impactful time, we need to become, again, adept at making connections between what's happening in our lives now to what's happened there in the past. And that in a way is a segue also, those connections, those threads, that living memory, that living history is part of what we want to, part of the connective tissue that we want to produce in the minds and in the bodies of our students.
Which is a segue to the second class that you are offering. Okay, so the first one is for anyone doing part one.
Anyone doing part one of the high school curriculum of Woke Freedom, yes.
Yes. So if your student is doing part one, I beg you to sign up for this class. You will not be sorry. But if you are in part two, or if you're in part one, or if you're, I don't know, you have a child enrolled in school and they're using a different book altogether, all of those groups of people can attend the second class. Tell us about the thematic discussions class.
Right.
Okay.
So with the thematic discussion class, everyone can join, everyone can be a part of it. And the reason why is because all of our discussion is really going to revolve around the here and the now. So it's going to revolve around current events, the things that we can see on our news feeds, the things that are the headlines of the day, the things that are the hot takes that you might get on your social media feed. All of those things oftentimes are tied to not just our today, not just this moment, but they're usually tied to something that's happened in the past. You know, we can best understand our present if we understand our future. And unfortunately, we're living in a day and time right now where the objective of those who oppose us is for us to forget that history, is to forget that connective tissue of events and agendas that have created the circumstances that we oftentimes find ourselves living under. And so this class is really designed to help students take what happens today and understand it better, and then contextualize it within a longer thread of events, of history, of continuity, so that the students can understand how we got here and understand possibly some of the solutions from days gone by that can better affect and better help us to better process the events of today. You know, one of the important things about history is that it's dynamic. And by dynamic, I mean is that it's constantly moving, it's constantly shifting and constantly changing. One of the failures of the American educational system is that we've oftentimes taught history as a very static thing. You know, these things happened, they don't change. Yeah, maybe the things that happened didn't change, but we change. And more emphatically, in a lot of ways, we don't change. What I mean is that a lot of the things that have happened before will continue to happen. You know, other people have had to deal with what we're dealing with now.
We don't learn.
We're not the first generation that has had to think about our bodies being put at risk in order to make sure that we feed our families.
Mm.
We're not the first generation to have to make those kinds of decisions or make those kinds of sacrifices. We're not the first generation who's had to wrestle with what it means for us to teach our own children because the state or institutions won't allow us to do it the way that we think it needs to be done. We're not the first generation for that. We're not the first generation to have to think about what it means to live in a country where insurrection is a possibility. So if we have to ask those questions, if we have to recognize those realities, then what kinds of questions do we ask of today that in some way reflects on things that we haven't been told about yesterday, right? So part of what this class, the thematic class, is designed to do is help us to ask some better questions, help us to ask some critical questions about the events of today and how they're tied to things that have already happened. You know, one of the buzzwords about my educational approach is tied to a term called inquiry-based learning. And inquiry-based learning is really just a fancy way of saying that the educational environment is led by the curiosity of the student. And allowing that student to ask questions about the things that pique their intellectual their intellectual curiosity, right? So part of my job as a facilitator is to, number one, help the student shape more nuanced questions. And then part of my job is also to help the student think about how best to find the answers that are going to feed those particular questions. So I get a chance to help that student, research and find the places to find the good information. We live in an age that is truly the information-led age. We don't suffer from a lack of information. We suffer from a lack of discretion. And what I mean by that is, how do we process all the information that we have? Mm-hmm. How do we sift through all of the stuff that comes across us each and every day in order to find the kernels of truth that are going to point us back to something that's real and tangible, something that's substantive, right? So thinking about research. And then after we found that information, part of my job as a facilitator is to help the student digest what they found, be able to internalize that which is good. And what I mean by good, that satisfies their intellectual curiosity, and give them some tools by which they can re-articulate it to you. Mm-hmm. So that they can actually talk to their peers, or talk to their parents, or talk to their instructors or their teachers or the people on the job about the things that are important to them, to help other people see the connections that they've been able to make. And to be quite honestly, that's a skill, that's a skill we all need.
Yeah.
And it's something that for those of us that are older, we've gained really through experience.
I'm 23. Who are you talking to?
Yeah. I mean, I know I'm talking to the other 23-year-olds in the room. Okay. And the people who double that like me.
So one of the things that you are adding to part one and part two, part one and the thematic discussion.
Yes.
Is because you meet every other week live on Zoom. So what do the kids do in between that time?
Right. So our class is structured so that we're going to have those powerful discussions every other week. But one of the pieces of feedback that we got from last semester is that, man, the discussions are great, but besides reading, what else can we do on those off weeks? So on those weeks, I'm going to be giving some different assignments to help to facilitate the discussion. And these assignments are going to be more than just reading particular texts. Some of them are going to be observational assignments. So things that I want you to see and observe in the news so that we can process it, kind of summarize it and then talk about it when we come back. Some things are going to be more interactive, where I might ask you all to do some, interviews of particular people, get some responses so that we can bring that back and see what we find. Some of the assignments are going to be investigative, right? Sometimes an investigation is go find this piece of information, and that's good. That's kind of like an entry-level investigation. Sometimes, though, the investigation needs to be a little bit more complex, in that the thing that I want you to investigate is I want you to find a pattern. Oh. Not just find a thing, right? Because if you think about any good detective story or any good mystery, the thing that sews the tale together is some kind of pattern that you have to find. How do we find those patterns in history? How do we find those patterns in conversation? How do we find those patterns, or how do we find a pattern in news or the headlines?
They say history rhymes.
Yeah, they do, right? I love that. So yeah, sometimes I want you guys to find a pattern through an investigation. Sometimes the investigation is, I need you to find the origin of a thing. And because we're talking about current events, one of my passion projects is discussions around conspiracy theories. Oh. And one of the interesting things about conspiracy theories is that for a good number of them, if you do the right kind of research, you can find where the conspiracy theory started.
Okay.
And oftentimes that can determine how valid the theory is. Like sometimes a conspiracy theory can start with one person, and you can find that one person.
Thank you, internet.
Especially in our media climate, right? So my point is that these assignments that happen in the intern are not your parents' assignments, I guess I would say. You know, they're going to be things that help you to think and help you to do something with information, especially the kinds of things that we gain from history, so that we can start building those threads of conversation and connectiveness, right? So that's the thing I'm really excited about. The other thing, as a college professor and whose expertise is primarily in the African diaspora in writing and rhetoric. And for these purposes, when we talk about rhetoric, we're talking about the art of persuasion. I'm really excited to use this class as a place to start thinking a little bit more about the way propaganda and argument are kind of fused in our media environment, and being able to sift through some of the things that we hear and be able to tease out what kinds of arguments do people make when they're putting information out there, and what kind of arguments lend themselves towards propaganda, you know, turning people's attentions towards a particular thing. And then also, how does that tie into the way we see history? Like I said before, the events are the same. We can, the events are what the events are. It's how we see those events, how we connect back to those events that really tells the tale.
And I'm thinking, what about the ideas that you assume we all believe? That, we all have to believe this in order for you to take me here with your propaganda.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for propaganda to work, we have to agree in a way on certain propositions, right? We have to all have certain assumptions that we believe to be true in order for the propaganda to take hold. So here's my question for everybody out there. What particular ideas about a particular American institution, it could be education or about the government or about the medical establishment, what particular ideas about those American institutions are the ones that always get pushed forward? And then my second question is this: how long has that been the case in your own lifetime? You can ask yourself, oh, they used to talk about schools like this. Now they talk about schools like that. When you see that shift, it's not so much that the institutions so much have changed, it's the way media attends to that institution that might demonstrate more of a shift. So those are the kinds of things we want to try to tease out in the thematic conversation. There is nothing that is off limits when it comes to our thematic discussions. If it's good enough to make it into the paper, if it's good enough to make it into your social media feed, and it's good enough for us to talk about and see if there's a historical connection that can be made.
Uh-oh, don't say nothing. You on TikTok?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, I like to see you do those segues. Okay.
Goodness.
So let me tell y'all details about the class. WokeSchoolOnline.com. You can sign up. The first one you'll see on that page is the first class that Jason facilitates. It's Freedom High School Discussion Part 1. And the very last one that you see on that page is the thematic discussion class. Sign up for either one, sign up for both. They're actually back to back on Thursday, so don't sign up for both. But yeah, talk to your high school student about what they want to learn about, which one resonates with them. But seriously, pick one of these classes. You're not going to be sorry. It's going to be a rich discussion. You're going to be jealous that you're not in this class, and we're going to figure out how to get Jason to do an adult class.
I'm ready. I'm waiting on y'all.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Jason, for doing these classes for us.
Awesome.
Truly.
No problem. No
Truly.
problem.
And thanks for giving us all this information this evening.
I enjoyed. I can't wait to get started.
All right. Yes. Class starts next week. Register by January 13th. I'll see y'all soon.